I'm one of the old guard when it comes to video games, having started my adventures with things like the Commodore 64 and Atari when I could barely string together coherent sentences or know my hand from my foot. I've been around for all the changes, for better or worse, over the years, and I still remember how it felt to play all these cool new games like Resident Evil, Silent Hill, etc. as they came out. And so, recently, I got to thinking, not everybody was there to experience that. And several decades have now passed since a lot of my favourite games and series were first released. With time, attitudes also change, and games that might have been looked down upon when first released later go on to become cult classics, while other games that people loved don't exactly hold up so well these days. Now, you all know of my massive love for Fatal Frame, so this week, let's go back in time to 2002 or so, and look at how the game was reviewed upon release. If you were there, this might dig up some memories, and if you weren't, let's take a unique dive into some Japanese horror gaming history. Was the game favourably looked upon in the West? Did it suffer constant comparisons to kings of the genre, Resident Evil and Silent Hill? Were people wary of its Japanese location? Let's take a look. First up, let's look at a rather small review from GamePro. This one was posted on March 4th, 2002, so roughly a week or so after the game came out in America. It's short and to the point, giving just a few sentences to set the scene. You enter a mysterious mansion to find your brother, who was, in turn, looking for a missing author, and then spends the rest of the review talking purely about the camera and how, well, it's not very fun. The idea of defending yourself with just your camera and some special film is interesting, if not particularly fun. When ghosts attack, you must shift to camera vision, point and shoot. Each in-frame picture you take damages the ghost. This would be a lot of fun if the camera controls felt right, but the analog sticks trade functions in camera mode, and trying to evade attacking ghosts from within a viewfinder is annoyingly difficult. I mean, where is the lie? Fatal Frame 1 is probably, somehow, the game I've played the second most in the series, behind Fatal Frame 5, but holy crap, it controls like ass these days. But as we can see from this review, it's not just these days. Even at the time, people didn't like the controls. They continue, discovering hidden ghosts and piecing together the mystery of the mansion are almost fun enough to excuse the lame combat controls. But not quite. The review concludes that it can't quite keep up with Resident Evil and Silent Hill, but if you're a horror gamer, it's definitely worth a try. Again, can't argue there. Now, let's head over to Eurogamer, with this review published on September 10th, 2002. That's about 10 days after its European release. It opens with, well, a very 2002 quote, so keep the time frame in mind. Think Tecmo and what comes to mind. Own up, I know exactly what you thought. You thought boobies, and you were quite right. Yeah, they've had a reputation for a while now. At any rate, this review begins quite cautiously, pointing out that the game's EU distributor, Wanadu, is new to publishing, and Tecmo and their famous boobies aren't exactly known for horror games either. On top of that, the game is cheap. Only $29.99 in the UK. Imagine trying to buy the game for that today. However, and I quote, "The signs were not good. The signs couldn't have been more wrong. Far from being budget price tat, this is one of the most intelligent, terrifying, and downright superb games the PS2 has yet seen." Yes, no boobies in this one, but the reviewer ended up being pleasantly surprised. The graphics in particular are highlighted here. Everything in the game is real-time, with not a touch of FMV in sight. Remember, the PlayStation 2 only came out 2 years earlier, and before that, the majority of cutscenes were FMVs. The review also points out the use of noise and other on-screen effects to create that sort of aged film look that Shibata has spoken at length about before, something you didn't see much of at the time. The camera positioning is also excellent in places, using horror film tricks to add to a sense of unease. And while comparing the game to Silent Hill, at least in terms of camera position and movement, it points out that Silent Hill and Resident Evil, while being Japanese-made games, are inspired by Western horror, while Fatal Frame stays closer to home. In fact, Ring, and its sequels, Ring 2 and Ring 0, are the films which Project Zero most reminded us of, with several various obvious homages to the movies in the game. Ring came out in Japan in 1998, with limited showings around the world in 1999 and onward. But Ring didn't hit people's homes until 2003 or so, well after this review, so even at the time, Ring itself was still rather niche, and the American remake didn't come out until a month or so after this review. Sadako was not yet big in the Western consciousness, unless you were already a hipster J-horror fan who enjoyed film festivals or somehow got your videos directly from Asia, or knew a friend who did. And to wrap up, the review praises the game's puzzles, pointing out that Resident Evil and Silent Hill puzzles can be frustrating and don't always make sense, but here, the puzzles are logical, and you generally won't be at a loss as to what you should do next. Overall, this is a game which you simply must buy if you're a fan of survival horror, or of the Ring movies, or of horror in general, and it's one which deserves pride of place in your collection, even if you're just a gamer looking for something a bit different. High praise indeed. IGN published their review on March 5th, 2002, so again, roughly a week after the game's NA release. Interestingly, this one starts with a point of contention that people are still talking about to this day. Fatal Frame may not be the first video game to be based on a true story, but it is probably the first to advertise the fact. It was a bad decision on Tecmo's part to add the subtitle, in my mind, because this is in fact a very good game, and it's a disservice to the production to immediately stamp it with the same brand as so many appalling Saturday night TV movies. This is something I honestly forget a lot these days, but it's important to remember that yes, in America, this game was marketed as being based on a true story, despite the fact it, well, isn't. Unless you count Shibata trying to include his supposed encounters with spirits over the years into parts of the game. I don't know. At any rate, it's a better looking game than we would have expected from an unknown development team at Tecmo, with a serviceable engine guided by a steady artistic hand. The review goes on to talk about how much of the violence and terrifying aspects of this game actually happened in the past. It's not something you're really dealing with in the here and now, like Resident Evil or Silent Hill. They're an ominous presence, rather than an immediate threat. The fear here is of what you don't see, or just miss seeing, not what jumps out from behind the two-way mirrors and whatnot. The camera is praised for being something different to the usual lead pipes and shotguns, and they make a point of noting Tecmo's solution to the common problem at the time of fixed camera angles combined with, well, to tank control or not to tank control. Yes, I was alive then, and even at the time, many people hated tank controls. I was one of them. Tecmo's solution for this problem was to simply hold the square button. This way, you keep running in whatever direction you're facing, even if the camera changes. No tank controls and no constantly changing directions because you're holding up, but now the camera changed and suddenly you're moving to the side. Just hold square and you keep moving in that same direction no matter what. Genius. The graphics, lighting, and sound are also praised, as well as, interestingly, the dub. Either way though, the dialogue doesn't break the mood established by the rest of the game, which is an A-OK job compared to most other horror games. It ends by describing the game as, well, somewhat above average. But even the jaded might find something to renew their interest in the genre. And yes, before moving on, I do have to point out that the entire review repeatedly called Miku Miyu, and for some reason I just find that really funny. Well done, IGN. This GameSpot review was published on February 3rd, 2004, and looks at the game as a whole, but with a special focus on the later Xbox release. As with most reviews of the time, it starts by comparing it to Resident Evil, but points out, one of the games that has successfully managed to take a different approach is Tecmo's Fatal Frame. The game was released earlier this year for the PlayStation 2, and earned positive notes for its unique gameplay, stylish presentation, and excellent sound. Again, these days people might not even realize it, but Fatal Frame really was pushing the boundaries of sound design when it came out. Sound just wasn't something that people focused on so much back then, at least in terms of creating atmosphere and drawing you into a game world. Fatal Frame features 3D sound, and if you wore headphones when playing it for the first time, you were drawn into a unique world where you could hear exactly where the ghosts were making sounds relative to you, and that wasn't something many games did at the time. The review continues by describing the story a little, but I have to point out my favourite quote. Undaunted by the fact that the score is Mansion 6, Curious People 0, Miku heads into the creepy manor. Where are the lies? This review actually praises the camera and combat. Although awkward camera angles can make exploring and combat more challenging than they need to be. And as for the port, they praise the button mapping to the Xbox controller, but graphically it's not too different to the PS2 version. There are, however, some extras you won't find on the PS2 version, so there's replayability as well. The game's unique concept and execution offer an alternative to the standard survival horror conventions, although it also features some of the gameplay drawbacks common to the genre. And let's wrap this video up with a few quick quotes from other reviews at the time. One GameSpot review, published on March 8th, 2002, is pretty overall positive, except for the puzzles. A few of them are interesting in concept. You'll gain clues from a variety of sources, including the aforementioned spectral photos, and from things like audio cassettes, which you can actually listen to, diaries, news clippings, and ancient religious texts. Piecing together clues by poring through various documents is something that could have been pretty interesting, but unfortunately, it was something that wasn't ever fully realized in Fatal Frame, despite there being elements in the game that lead you to believe it would. One certain recurring puzzle, which was designed heavily around certain Japanese numerical characters, will have you reaching for a pad and pencil soon after you first encounter it. So, be prepared. I also thought this quote from the April 1st, 2002 Game Revolution review was pretty interesting. Fatal Frame's problems are minor. The first you'll likely encounter is that the game save file is so darn big. Forget about keeping a Fatal Frame save on the same card as 10 other game saves like you're probably used to. A reminder for those of us old enough to be hearing bones cracking now that, yeah, managing memory cards used to be a thing, and Fatal Frame was a memory hog. This May 2002 issue of the Australian PlayStation 2 magazine actually points out much of the scares are based on some of the experiences and childhood memories of the producer and director, Keisuke Kikuchi and Makoto Shibata. A lot of this information came to light in the English-speaking world much later on, thanks to fan translations of the Japanese guides, but at least some of it was still out there. The November 2002 issue of Hyper magazine in Australia also hypes the game up as being something different from Resident Evil and Silent Hill. Project Zero isn't for everyone, but jaded survival horror fans will relish the emphasis on atmosphere over gore. Turn the lights off and enjoy. And the March 2002 issue of PlayStation magazine in the US notes, Fatal Frame's artistic film noir visuals, complete with ghostly flashbacks and black and white sequences, create a continuous tension that makes Silent Hill feel like Disneyland. Even to this day, it's hard for any horror game, particularly in the survival horror niche, to get away from Resident Evil and Silent Hill comparisons. They are the kings of the genre for a reason. And while Fatal Frame did okay overseas, it was never a massive hit, likely due to it being considered a niche game in a niche genre, what with it being set in Japan before Japanese horror really hit the mainstream. The sequel would certainly do better in that regard though. At any rate, I hope you guys enjoyed this trip down memory lane, or, if you're one of them young'uns, the brief history lesson. But what about you guys? Are you old like me and you were around for Fatal Frame's original release? What did you think of it at the time? What do you think of it now? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you again next time.